it could have been that we didn't land successfully, and then whatever we had gotten back from the DSN was the only thing we would have ever gotten from the investment of that mission. So it was super, super critical, the support that we got for the DSN. And of course, oh, by the way, we're still there, and it's all working great. So about the Comm stuff, you know, I've given some talks on MSL, and people say, well, what's it like? What's it like? You know, having this mission. So I've worked on MSL for like 8 years. I actually, I was, as they said, I was the lead flight system engineer, so I was responsible for all the avionics on board the spacecraft, the thermal, the power, the communications, and then I also was one of the deputies for the entry, descent, and landing system as well. So I was very, very involved in the last few years in terms of the entire spacecraft and how we were going to do landing and what that was going to look like. But then also, personally, I was part of the team that built 2 of the radios that are on MSL, 2 of the UHF radios, and I'll tell you a little bit about MSL's kind of dual means of communication. And so it was very satisfying for me to be able to come out here and talk about the communications aspect, which I think is underplayed when people talk about MSL. So go to the next slide. Okay, so everybody's seen a lot of stuff on Curiosity. I hope you've gone to the website. We've actually got a great Twitter crew at Mars Curiosity that talks about also sort of a counterculture version, the at Sarcastic Rover. Super funny. We enjoy at Sarcastic Rover very much. So she's got a lot of things going on. I mean, you guys have seen some of the science return after only a couple months. We've already driven over half a kilometer. So she's super, super capable, but we depend on the DSN to help get the job done. The analogy I like to make is, you know, you teach a kid, you know, everything you know, you bring them up and you teach them right from wrong, you teach them how to keep themselves warm, how to keep themselves fed, and then you send them to college, and now they're far away. You assume they're doing well, but unless they call, you can't actually know that. Well, of course, they call, they tweet, they they Facebook, they whatever. But the point is, it has to go through the interwebs, as we like to say. And the DSN is our interwebs. The DSN is what allows Curiosity to keep us always up to date on her status. So, next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what was in Curiosity, how we do the communications, and then I'm going to focus on 2 of the kind of prime aspects of the mission, landing, and then also surface, and how it's this careful dance with, you know, the DSN support that we get, and then the kind of things that we want to do during a day, back and forth, back and forth. So here's some pictures of the spacecraft. You think, wow, those are 3, 4 completely different spacecraft. But this is the transformer view of Curiosity. I apologize, I can't leave the microphone very well. But the thing that you know and love is Curiosity is this thing that the surface down in the bottom right-hand corner. So this is the comm-centric point of view of Curiosity. All the things that you see being pointed to are all the various different antennas that she can use. The radios are buried inside the belly of Curiosity. So for example, when we were in our cruise phase, which is this flying saucer thing up here, we had several antennas that could talk back to the Deep Space Network as we were going through cruise. Generally in cruise, there wasn't a whole lot of things happening. For the first few weeks, we talked to the DSN pretty much every day. I mean, continuously. After that, we'd talk every few days, every couple days, unless we were doing some big event. So it was always very much a coordination. Like, for instance, we did a software load partway through cruise that would allow us to be more capable for landing and for early surface. And so that was one of those occasions, you know, we're putting the spacecraft into sort of a sketchy mode, and so we would request from the DSN continuous coverage to be able to make sure that things were happening. And somebody did mention, you know, 10 bits a second. They're like, 10 bits a second? No, our safing mode was, I think, 40 bits a second. So, I mean, imagine like a tweet, you know, you get a tweet like every 1 second. Oh, I'm not feeling well. I mean, so it's sort of we actually went into safing once, at least once, during cruise. And, you know, the first thing you see is that the data goes down to something very low. The DSN has to pick it back up again. The data rate goes to something low. And so it's kind of funny. It's sort of like if you're talking to somebody on the phone, and just when you hear a loud screech and a crash and a yelp, they're not talking to you anymore. And it's like, no. But I mean, there's a very good reason for that, and that's you see the antennas that are on the spacecraft. The spacecraft could be limping along. There could be something wrong with the computer. The spacecraft could be in a funny attitude, so those antennas aren't pointed back on Earth, say. And so what you want to be able to do is basically just blast up a signal, and that's where the DSN comes in with those big transmitters. You want to be able to blast up a signal and basically shake it out of its stupor and be able to talk to it, and vice versa. If we're not talking that well, if something's wrong with our radio, something like that, we need those big ears on the ground to be able to pick up the signal, and so by dropping the data rate, we're able to get a little bit more power into that signal ourselves, and then give the DSN a better chance of being able to find out what we're talking about. So anyway, so cruise stage, then we go into entry. We're still talking to the DSN entry, but here's where we pick up a new capability called relay. So the spacecraft actually has two completely separate sets of communications equipment on board. So one is an X-band, which you'll see the antennas that can support us at X-band. So that's a higher frequency signal. Generally, that gives you a better data rate, except for when you're at very long distances, which of course Curiosity is. You see she's not towing a big dish behind her, that she's not capable of doing that, but you can. Let me just see if I can point. This thing that's called HGA, high gain antenna, that thing is about this big. So this is the antenna that we have to talk to the DSN. When you go outside later and you see the 70-meter antenna, you can see the differential between them. But for surface operations and when we are close to the planet, we also have these other antennas that operate at UHF, which is low frequency, like 400 megahertz. And what they're specifically supposed to do is be able to talk to the orbiters overhead. So we have a few orbiters at Mars that also carry radios, and these radios point down to Mars, which you might think, well, that's kind of funny, because why would you want to talk to Mars, except for the Martians? Why would you want to talk to Mars? And that's because people had this vision, early on, that to get better communications rates back from Mars, especially when you think of not only is, Curiosity, well, she's a moose, but she's a small moose compared to, being in space. Not only can she not carry large communication equipment with her, I mean, like I said, when you see these antennas, you'll see what I'm talking about. Also, even though we saw for the DSN with the 3 stations around the globe, as the Earth turns, you can see the DSN stations. One will come up as another one's coming down. When we're on the surface of Mars, obviously as Mars rotates, there are some times when you just physically can't see the DSN because the planet's in the way. However, our orbiters that are overhead, they have a better view of the DSN generally. Also, they do have like big solar panels, they can have big transmitters, they can have big antennas because they're not so constrained. They don't have to drag that stuff with them like we do if we had that sort of thing. So Curiosity has the capability to talk directly to the DSN, but she also has a capability to talk to one of the orbiters. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is one of those. Mars Odyssey is another one that we regularly talk to. And now, actually, we just started talking with Mars Express, which I think is a European mission that also has a radio on board that points down. So she's got multiple different ways, just like, IM plus tweet plus whatever. She's got multiple different ways to talk back to the ground. But ultimately, obviously, all that does come through the DSN, because even our orbiter partners, they have to be able to see the Earth. They have to be able to get back to the ground as well. So next slide. I'd like to talk a little bit about landing night. So number one, holy crap. Number two, so the way that kind of EDL plays out, so for the first like 2 weeks or so before we were getting into to entry, so everything with EDL is reference to entry. That was when we were coming through the atmosphere. We were coming through that window in the atmosphere that was going to put us on the ground. Now, something to keep in mind is that Curiosity has no idea where Mars is. It doesn't see Mars. It doesn't have sensors for Mars per se. What it knows is that we told it however many months ago, we want you to go off into space and land at a point here. Now, we hope that's on Mars. That's what we plan for. But she doesn't know it, and we can't tell her any different unless we have a very, very good understanding of where she is at any one time. So basically for the last, certainly all through cruise, but for the last couple of weeks, and especially the last week, as we're coming into Mars, we would have daily briefings from our navigators who would be using the data that they had received from the DSN in terms of what they thought the position was. Basically, it was kind of interesting. I never really quite did understand the plots. I'm a bits and bytes person, and this is like heavy-duty aerospace stuff. But basically, if you imagine there's the planet, here's the atmosphere around the planet, there's a window at the top of the atmosphere that if she hits that window in the right place, she knows how to get from that window to the point on the ground that we tell her. If she hits that window in the wrong place, she's still going to go to that point on the ground that she thinks that we told her, but it's going to be wrong now, and that's going to put us out of the box. And if anybody's seen pictures of the landing site, we could have really messed ourselves up, right? I mean, it's smooth and flat where we are, but there's Mount Sharp in the middle, bigger than Mount Rainier, I believe. And then there was like some cliffs from the crater wall on the other side. And then there were dunes and various things. It was actually kind of fun to see the people kind of working through where we wanted to land. But anyway, so it's not just a matter of scientific interest where we landed, but in fact it was a matter of safety to the spacecraft that we landed in the right place. So it was very, very critical in those last few weeks, especially as we were coming in, for the navigators to be able to see in that box at the top of the atmosphere where she was going to come in. Now we could have maybe made a course correction, we could have uploaded new parameters and said, hey, you know what, when you hit that box, don't go this line to the ground, go like this line to the ground, which would have put her a little off. So very, very critical, the navigation data that we're getting. So now we're starting to get in, we're about 2 hours out. At this point, I think everybody has heard the 14-minute delay, you know, just the light time. Well, if we wanted to actually do something, you got to really think of it as a 28-minute delay, basically half an hour delay, because we would have to see there's something we didn't like, and then of course, you know, get 50 people in a room, scream and go crazy, and then say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And then we'd have to send it up and then wait 14 minutes for it to come back. So really, at a certain point, which was a couple hours out, we're like, okay, whatever Curiosity does, she's on her own now. Of course, we're very interested in what she's doing, but there's nothing that we can do about it. So in fact, at that point, I believe like an hour out or something, the DSN actually turns off its transmitter, basically to allow the spacecraft to go into kind of an internal transmit mode. And we've really said, we're done. You guys are on your own. Now, Goldstone was the station just a few hours out of landing, but then we transitioned over, as you know, the Earth is turning. We were over actually Canberra as we actually were going in, I think from about 20 minutes to entry and then down. So you can see, so what this is showing is kind of the lit up Christmas tree of coverage that we had at that time. So we have MSL coming in, screaming in from the top of the atmosphere. We had 3 of the antennas at Canberra, so their big 70 meter, which is DSS 43, and then 2 of their other ones. And you'll notice you're seeing like a lot of arrows, and you think, geez, I'm not really sure the number of antennas and the number of spacecraft, it seems to not quite make sense. So number 1, we had multiple antennas listening to MSL. Again, if something were to happen, we wanted to have all the data that we could. So not only just the 3 DSN antennas, but we had a couple of partner antennas also in Australia listening. But what you could also see is that for like some of these antennas, you see some of our orbiter support also going to the same one. So Odyssey, we had a real-time relay. So basically Odyssey, the way its orbit was and the way that it handles data, it was able to pick up our signal and then immediately turn the bits back down to the ground. So as immediate as, 28 minutes round trip late time, we could get real-time data from Odyssey. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter also has a radio on board. It was also going to record, but kind of interestingly, as we come through the atmosphere, there's all these sort of dynamics. The spacecraft itself is banking to slow itself down. The parachute comes out, it's jerking around. And so one of the things that we're concerned about is if I'm a radio and I'm trying to listen to each bit as it's coming through, sort of if I'm listening to somebody in real time and I'm trying to write down what you say, I could miss things if you're jerking around or if you're in the car or something, there's noise. And so what I might also want to do is just record you, so later on I could play it back over and over again and see, like, if I miss something, maybe I'll pick it up the second, third time. So what Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter was doing is it was just recording our signal. It wasn't trying to figure out what we were saying. It was just recording it, and then it would send it back later. So given that something happened with Odyssey, or for whatever reason we lost the signal, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter was also there. But because of the way that its central computer works, it could not send the data back in real time. So we're really counting on Odyssey to give us real-time data. But one of the things that the DSN provides, which was super helpful for us, is if you can picture, like this picture doesn't really show it, but if I picture Mars as a pinpoint way off in the sky, and you have one of these big beast antennas pointing at it, it can see all those spacecraft, or a lot of those spacecraft that are all in the same place. So actually one thing the DSN provides, somebody could get me water? Thank you. One of the things that DSN provides is the ability to track multiple spacecraft per antenna, and so that allowed us to have essentially more coverage than we could. We didn't have to have thank you so much. We didn't have to have a single antenna tied up with just one spacecraft. We could actually have multiple spacecraft and multiple antennas, and so I can't imagine what the data downstream of this looked like. You know, wait, you're talking to who? And this is from, but the guys that know how to do this worked it out. So the next slide gives us, thank you, sort of the timeline that I was describing. So, you know, people were saying about the 10 bits a second, whatever. We weren't 10 bits a second. We weren't that bad. We were at 2 kilobits coming in, which was super low. And actually what's kind of interesting is, even though we have low data rates, in fact, even now we have low data rates, we get like sometimes 2 megabits, which awesome for us, but for you, you'd be like, 2 megabits, holy cow. But the data that we like to see getting back is basically, if you imagine a Twitter feed from the spacecraft. I mean, literally, I'm not being funny here. The spacecraft, along with, you know, telemetry data, like this is my temperature, this is the power, this is what's on, this is what's off. It also essentially tweets constantly, like, oh, I think it's about 20 minutes from landing. Well, I think I'm going to turn on this heater. Well, and it literally, it basically says that, you know, now configuring for such and such, now configuring for such and such. So that kind of real time, you know, I'm at the mall, I'm going into Abercrombie and Fitch, whatever stuff, really gives us a much better understanding of what the spacecraft is doing than just this is my power, this is my temperature, etc. So up until the point where we get close to the planet, we were able to get that Twitter feed. But then as we got in closer, now basically the distance to the ground is such that it's hard to get the data back. Plus, with the dynamics, it's hard for us to keep an antenna point. So basically what we do is we go, oh, sorry, this would have had other graphics. I have a Macintosh, and so I should have PDF'd it. So basically at this point here, this E-minus 10 minutes, what we do is go to something called tones, and these are basically semaphores, and like people are sitting here saying like, oh, you know, 10 bits a second, that sounds pretty lame. No, semaphores are basically like, here's a tone, like do, re, mi. Do, that means I am in a nominal configuration. Re, that means I just turned on a set of heaters. So we are down to super low data rates essentially now. And basically it's just because we want to make sure that we're going to get some information from the spacecraft just in case, you know, things don't go well. And by things don't go well, I mean the radios have a problem or the computer has a problem or something like that. So at this cruise stage separation, now we're doing tones, and so now we don't even have the little tweets going on. We just have tones directly back to the DSN. Now, as kind of a side note, we also can see the signal. We can see as the signal changes, and you all know about the Doppler effect, so we can see Doppler in the signal. So the thing that we on the EDL team were very jealous about is that the navigators are sitting back there looking at the real-time Doppler. In a lot of cases, they could tell what was happening to the spacecraft before we could, because we had to wait for, like, you know, the blog post to come out where they were just like, oh, well, I saw this dynamic shift. That clearly means that the parachute has deployed. And they would be like, yay, and we're all, what are you, do you see something? So we had one of those plots up on the screen, actually, and somebody was saying, like, why are you putting up a plot of the Doppler? There's only 2 people in the room that know what it is, and they're going to jump up anyway. So at that cruise stage separation around there, now we're just on tones. And like I said, super low data rate, and so we're really just waiting that time when, you know, we're sitting in the control room and everybody just kind of like, you know, pause there, you know, just kind of looking down. It's because all we have are tones. Actually, I think at that point, they had the tones on the screen over here. So you see at some point, everybody's going like this, and you're like, well, what are they looking at? Well, we could see the tones coming out with what they meant. Actually, I'll tell you, at one point, one of the tones came out, and the title of it was something like Catastrophic Attitude. And so, like, we were like, the EDL kind of folks were like, oh, but then the instrument that was doing it basically is this thing that detects like atmospheric pressure, and it was giving us a reading at the very, very top of the atmosphere when really there's nothing to speak of, and so it misread that. I mean, it's just something we use as like a side data. It's not something that we use to act on or anything. But, you know, for a minute when that tone came down, you're like, well, everything else looks okay. I guess we're still okay. Right. Okay, we'll just ignore that for now. So nobody jumped up and said catastrophic attitude, I think you'll remember. So that's all we have for quite a while. Then we go through the entry, and then around the time when we're deploying the parachute, and then we have the back shell separation, you can see where the vehicle's laying loose. A little bit before that, we actually have exposed, once we get rid of the cruise stage, actually, we've actually exposed the antennas that allow now the UHF radio, those relay radios, to see the orbiters. And so this is the first time we've used them. I mean, we turn them on in cruise, but we don't have anybody to talk to in cruise. So this is the first time we've used them the whole time. And so me, of course, as the original radio designer, plus actually my team also built the radio on MRO. So, you know, of course I want Curiosity to land, but more importantly, I want the radios to work too. So we're sitting there, we're watching the tones come down, and somebody made the announcement, you know, expecting UHF, and it's like, oh please, oh please, oh please. And then UHF comes down, and you're like, wow, you know, data rate, now we can see the tweets. Yeah, it was 8 kilobits. Not bytes, 8 kilobits. But to us, it was like, oh my gosh. So, you know, at that point, you could see all the stuff they've been doing. Oh yeah, I've already deployed the parachute. All of it. You know, it gave kind of a surrealistic feel when you saw the data coming from the spacecraft, like, we're so worried. And the spacecraft's like, what? This is what you told me to do. What? I'm on the ground. What? You know, what's the big deal? So anyway, so UHF kept going, and then we had thought, based on so, you know, you can imagine there's the planet, here's, you know, we're screaming in, we're going to land, and then there's 2 orbiters that are, you know, sweeping past. There was a very good chance that the orbiters would have said, or based on the way that we landed, the antenna wouldn't be such that we could actually still get UHF when we landed. So, you know, people were very careful to say, well, wait for the EDL guys, you know, the aerodynamicists, to tell whether we've landed or not. And so, you know, we're all sitting there, you know, waiting to see, you know, the data looks good, but maybe, you know, the descent stage could have, like, dragged us across, you know, on our wheels and everything. But then when we got that first picture back, like, that was amazing, because that picture could only be taken once we touched down. That was the point of that picture. Plus, the picture wasn't like this. You know, the picture was like this. So, I mean, you could interpret 2 things. One, the camera was facing up, and then 2, the antenna was facing up, and it hadn't got sheared off. So we didn't know anything else about it. The wheels were still connected, nothing like that, but we knew it was right side up. And so that was just huge. Anyway, so, I mean, what allowed us to do that was this real-time relay through the Mars Odyssey back down to the DSN. Later on, I think a couple hours later, we got the Mars Reconnaissance Orbit data, but then it was like, yeah, we know what this looks like. It looks like awesome. So it didn't turn out to be quite as fraught with action as we thought. So next slide. Oh, okay. So direct DSN. I did not animate this. It animated itself. So that's awesome.
So now next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Oh yeah, direct to DSN. Yeah, all right. So surface operations. So this is what we're doing now. EDL is old news. Very sad. What we're doing now, basically, we have the configuration I kind of described to you for EDL in the same. So the Deep Space Network, of course, is our nexus of communications. We've got a Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Odyssey. That's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, I believe. And Odyssey, both doing relay for us. Like I said, we just started picking up relay coverage from MEX as well. Curiosity can talk to the Deep Space Network if we have our high-gain antenna working. Now, interesting, the high-gain antenna, you couldn't really see, but it's sort of a flat hexagonal paddle. And you have to point it to be able to use it. It's not what we call an omnidirectional antenna. We can't get back to the Earth in a lot of configurations with the omnidirectional antenna. There's just not enough power. Even with the DSN, there's not enough power with the Omni. And so one of the things that we were concerned about when we hit the surface is, like, if that motor had a problem, we wouldn't have been able to point the antenna, and then it would have been strictly UHF, which we have thought about doing missions like that, but, for some reason people, are nervous about UHF, which makes me, as the mother, very upset, but in any case. So, and then back here is kind of all the people who are interested. We have both the MSL operators, but also our orbiter partner operators who track what's coming back from the DSN. We have our science team. Actually, pretty much the entire project now is run by the science team, what they want to do during a day. Like when we drive, you think, oh, that's arbitrary. We do too. No, the science people, that's like their big thing. This is where we want to go, or we're interested in where we are, etc. And then, of course, the public, like all the pictures and stuff coming back. Somebody talked about streaming video coming back from Mars. Well, that's the next rover that we're working on right now, 2018 potentially. We're looking at putting an upward-facing camera just to be able to take pictures of what's coming down. Now, that might not be the highest priority data for us, but at the same time, if we had a bigger bandwidth, obviously we'd like to see it too. So, next page. This, I think, is my last slide. Kind of just gives you an idea of the day in the life and how closely tied it is with the DSN. So now this is all Mars time. Now people probably heard about people going on Mars time. Well, the Martian day is shorter than the Earth day, and a lot you think, well, we're not a solar powered mission, it doesn't matter so much. No, a lot of what we do depends on having the sun up. I mean, it's more interesting to take pictures when it's light out. Also, as it turns out, a big part of our power budget is heating. Like we have to heat up the motors and we have to heat up some of the electronics before we can use them. And so during the day, you basically get that heating for free. At night, you actually have to put a lot more power into it. So what this plot shows in a very complicated way is there's power up on this scale, and then there's time, basically a day's worth of Mars time on the bottom. And so you can see this step function here, up. So what this represents is at the beginning of the Martian day, we uplink new commands. We uplink big sequences. I want you to drive a little bit. I want you to turn on this instrument. I want you to take this reading. Maybe I want you to update some software, et cetera, et cetera. Then we go down. So that's the DSN link. We use the DSN to tell it in the morning what it wants to do. Obviously, it's nice to do it that way because with the relay, we have to go up to an orbiter in the cross. With the DSN, it's right there. So then we spend a bulk of the day doing some sort of processing, whatever we're going to do for the day. And you can see like the black line is just showing, power goes way up. As the power goes up, we start to drain our batteries. We need to conserve. So when we finish what we're doing at the end of the day, we generally time it such that we're right near a UHF window, basically when one of those orbiters come over. So those orbiters come over, we dump out everything that we've done during the day. And then this where the line goes back down is basically for the rest of the Martian night, which of course could be our night, could be our day. We have the people on the ground looking at the data, came back, are they interested in this rock? We were spending a lot of time on this one rock the last few days. Are they interested in this one rock? Do we want to move on? What do we want to do? So all through the night while the rover is sleeping, then the people on the ground are figuring out what we want to do the next day. Often there's another pass in the middle of the night. Now the rover has been sleeping. A lot of its timing has to do with when do I expect somebody to talk to me. So we actually have windows in the middle of the night sometimes where we wake it up and let it tell us, yeah, I'm still fine, let me go back to bed, I'm still okay. And then that goes down, and then whatever we come up with for that night in that tactical sequence, then the next day again starts all over talking to the DSN. So like I said, that's kind of a day in the life. And like I said, it's very tightly knit into when we can expect to talk to her to tell her what to do. And then conversely, when we expect her to talk back to us to tell us how everything went. It'd be nice if we could watch what she was doing in real time. But right now, that's just not possible. Someday when we have that Mars Communications network up there, so we do have more coverage during the day, then that will become more of a reality. So anyway, that's my overview of MSL. I tried very hard not to use pictures that you've already seen 200,000 times. I'm guessing this is not one. Right? Yeah? Not? Okay. Good. Thank you.
So, I understand this part of the day thing, but they're doing programs setting up the next day's workload during the Mars night.
Yeah, so during the Mars night, I just don't want to move off the, well, I won't move off the mic. So during the Mars night, we here on the ground are deciding what we want to do. We build the sequences for what we want to do, and then that's all queued up. So in the morning again, when we have the DSN pass in the morning, we can send up that file load of stuff to do, and it's all timed out. Like here, it's 10 o'clock, you should be doing this. It's 12 o'clock, you should be doing this. And so she'll execute that, and then in the afternoon or the evening UHF pass, that's when we get the data back down, the high volume data back down to find out how it went.
But you can't send the orders up at night, right?
We don't generally do that.
But
it's just not.
Nuclear you could. Right?
We could send commands up at night. It's kind of the flow of operations. It usually takes us a full Martian night to figure out what the next day's operations are. We don't script these way far in advance. We try to have everything very flexible.
How big are the data packets, and when they're sent back and forth, what transmission speeds are you sent at?
So the UHF can go up to 2 megabits, but that's variable because sometimes when we're low on the horizon, by virtue of where the spacecraft is and the orbiter is, we can go down to like 256 kilobits, depending. And then each frame, they vary. They can be on the order of a couple kilobits, or they could be I think they can be up to like half a megabit or something. But we can knit them together. If I get part of a frame, I can request retransmit of another frame. One thing that's nice about good and bad about UHF is we send up basically a whole burst of the day's data to one of the orbiters, and then the orbiter holds that whole burst of data, and then it sends it down at a much higher rate to DSN. So it's kind of, the latency is not so much because of what we can transmit at, it's these little, we only have like 15-minute windows of orbiters coming over. So in 15 minutes, basically, everything you can talk about in 15 minutes, done. And then the orbiter can do it at its leisure, send it back.
I wanted to know what that red line at the bottom was.
It was probably, there's like a sort of a keep alive power. So for example, if we're draining the batteries, because some of these instruments take like 1,000 watts, which for us is a lot. Our generator only produces 100 watts at a time. So you imagine a 100-watt light bulb. That's what's powering that whole spacecraft. So we've got giant batteries, and at a certain point, if you were to discharge the batteries too low, then it can't keep its kind of basic services. And it has ways to protect itself from that, but that's probably was that red line at the bottom. Basically, this is a do not exceed in terms of power draw. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.